The talk is based on a report that I co-authored called Taking AI Welfare Seriously. This report came out in fall 2024, and I led it along with philosopher Robert Long, who runs Elios AI Research based in the Bay Area. And we had a team of really excellent authors from across disciplines to work on it. And we argue in the report that we ought to, and by we, I mean researchers and companies and governments, but primarily for purposes of this discussion, companies, AI companies, ought to take AI welfare seriously, not only in the future, but right now. And that means taking seriously the possibility of AI systems developing their own morally significant interests and needs and vulnerabilities such that they deserve consideration, respect, compassion for their own sakes, not simply because it would make them safer for us, but also because it would be safer for them. We emphasize that AI companies should take AI welfare seriously now, not because AI systems definitely do have morally significant interests, needs, vulnerabilities now, and not even because they definitely will in the near future, but rather because, given the best evidence available right now, there is at least a realistic possibility, at least a non-negligible, non-trivial possibility that AI systems will develop their own morally significant interests, needs, vulnerabilities in the near future, say in the next 5 to 10 years. And that possibility, combined with the reality that people will have disagreement and uncertainty about this issue, whether we like it or not, is sufficient reason to start thinking about this issue more now so that we can thoughtfully prepare for these near future possibilities. And so what I can do in this talk today is, first of all, explain why we think a realistic, non-negligible, non-trivial possibility of moral significance is reason enough to take the issue seriously, why we think there is a realistic, non-negligible, non-trivial possibility of moral significance in the near future, and then what we think AI companies can do as minimum necessary first steps today towards taking the issue seriously. So first of all, why is a realistic possibility of moral significance the right time to start giving moral consideration? Well, we make that the threshold for moral consideration because this is a classic case of high stakes decision making involving disagreement and uncertainty. And that calls for caution and humility. It calls for principles of risk in decision making. And so, first of all, this issue is very important because the stakes are high and mistakes can be easy and costly in both directions. And what I mean by that is that we can make the mistake of over-attributing sentience, consciousness, agency, moral significance to non-humans, or under-attributing those features to non-humans. And both of those mistakes can be costly or harmful. So first of all, it can be easy to over-attribute sentience, consciousness, agency, moral significance to non-humans, especially when they look like us, when they act like us, when we have an incentive to use them as companions. This, for example, is why many people are prone to see even current generation chatbots as having thoughts and feelings of their own, even though they very likely do not. And this can be costly, of course, because it can lead us to form inappropriate one-sided social or emotional bonds with mere pattern matching text prediction chatbots. It could also lead us to make sacrifices for them inappropriately, allocating scarce resources towards them that we really need or other animals really need instead. But of course, mistakes in the other direction can be easy and harmful too. Under-attributing sentience, consciousness, agency, moral significance to non-humans, that can be especially easy when, for example, they look very differently than us, when they act very differently than us, when we have incentive to use them as commodities instead of companions. This, for example, is why we tend to under-attribute sentience to farmed animals, particularly farmed aquatic animals or invertebrates who are quite different from humans and whom we use as food. And that can obviously be not only costly, but extremely harmful. It can lead to mass exploitation, extermination of vulnerable populations against their will, often at huge scales, often for trivial reasons. And so this is an area where the stakes are high in both directions. Mistakes are easy and costly in both directions. And that means there is no easy, obvious way to always err on the side of caution when in doubt. But then the issue is also difficult because doubt is going to be pervasive. Questions about the moral significance of non-humans, it touches some of the hardest questions in ethics and science. In ethics, for example, experts have disagreement and uncertainty about what it takes to matter and merit consideration for your own sake. Do you need to be sentient, able to consciously experience happiness and suffering? Or is it enough to be conscious without being sentient, able to have subjective experiences, even if they lack a positive or negative valence? Or is it enough to have agency without consciousness, to be able to set and pursue your own goals in a self-directed manner, even if it feels like nothing to be you? Experts disagree. And then in science, we have disagreement and uncertainty about which beings possess those capacities. So take consciousness, the capacity for subjective awareness, subjective experience. Does that require having a brain with the exact structures and functions and materials as a human or mammalian or avian brain? Or can it exist in any cognitive system with broadly analogous capacities for perception, attention, learning, memory, self-awareness, flexible decision-making, perhaps a global workspace that can coordinate activity across these modules? Or can it exist in any even simpler system with a basic ability to process information or represent objects in the environment? Experts disagree about that too. And these areas of disagreement and uncertainty are likely to be ongoing. We are not on the cusp of a secure theory of moral standing or consciousness about which we can have anything like certainty or consensus. Our fundamental predicament is that we are one kind of mind making decisions on behalf of very many other types of minds without knowing for sure what, if anything, it feels like to be those minds. So that is why this issue is important, difficult, high stakes, involving disagreement and uncertainty, and why it calls for caution and humility. This is a classic case of when we should use principles involving risk when making decisions. Why, for example, do we take AI safety seriously? Not because AI systems definitely will cause catastrophic harm to humans and other animals, not even because they probably will. There might be only a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance that in the next 5 or 10 years, AI systems will cause catastrophic harm to humans and other animals. But if there is a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance that in the next 5 or 10 years, AI systems will cause catastrophic harm to humans and other animals, that at least merits consideration. It should at least be one factor among many in our decisions about whether and how to scale up this technology. Now, similarly, why, or so I argue with Robert Long and our colleagues, should we take AI welfare seriously, the possibility of AI systems developing their own morally significant interests? Not because they definitely will develop their own morally significant interests, not even because they probably will. Once again, there might be only a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance in the next 5 or 10 years, AI systems will develop their own morally significant interests. But if there is a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance that in the next 5 or 10 years, AI systems could have even flickers of their own version of pleasure, pain, happiness, suffering, satisfaction, frustration, then that, again, at least merits consideration. It should at least be one factor among many in decisions about whether and how to scale up this technology. So that is the sense in which we think the appropriate bar for consideration is not definite sentience or moral significance, or even probable sentience or moral significance, but rather, is there a realistic, non-negligible, non-trivial chance of sentience and moral significance given the evidence available? Now, how can we go about deciding whether there is a reasonable, non-negligible, non-trivial chance? Well, we have what is called a marker method or an indicator method that we can use to estimate at least rough probabilities of consciousness and other potentially significant capacities in non-humans. This is how it works. We can start by introspecting. So I can introspectively tell the difference between conscious processing and non-conscious processing in humans. So I can tell the difference in my own experience between when I feel pain versus when I have an unfelt nociceptive response, an unfelt detection of noxious stimuli. I can then figure out which behavioral and anatomical properties are specifically correlated with conscious processing, like felt pain in my own experience. And then I can go search for broadly analogous behavioral and anatomical properties in non-humans. Now, when I find those behavioral and anatomical properties in non-humans, that is not proof of consciousness. It does not establish certainty that they can experience pain too, but it does count as evidence, and it can at least increase the probability of, for example, conscious pain under uncertainty. For example, with animals, we can ask questions like, not only do they have the same brain and body structures that are relevant to pain experience in humans, but also, do they nurse their own wounds? Do they respond to analgesics and antidepressants in the same ways that we do? Do they make behavioral trade-offs between the avoidance of pain and the pursuit of other valuable goals? With AI systems, by contrast, we are not currently able to rely on behavioral evidence like language outputs in the same kind of way, partly because we lack the kind of anatomical and evolutionary continuity with AI systems that we have with other animals, and partly because we know that many AI systems are specifically designed to mimic human behavior, and that makes their behavior bad evidence. So if your chatbot tells you, I am conscious or I am not conscious, that is not good evidence one way or the other of the presence or absence of consciousness in this AI system. But we might one day be able to develop systems whose behavior can count as better evidence. And in the meantime, we can look underneath potentially misleading behaviors for architectural computational evidence associated with consciousness according to a wide range of leading scientific theories of consciousness. So we can look for architectural computational properties associated with not only physical embodiment, but also perception, attention, learning, memory, self-awareness, flexible decision-making, a global workspace. And if we did find all of that together, it could at least be some evidence that consciousness is present. It could at least increase the probability that consciousness is present. Now, what do we find when we look for this evidence of non-humans in various kinds? Now, with animals, when we look for the evidence, we tend to find at least mixed and incomplete versions of the evidence. And at this point, many experts are now acknowledging that there is at least a realistic possibility of consciousness in a vast number and wide range of animals based on this kind of evidence. And that includes all vertebrates like mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fishes. And it includes many invertebrates with very different cognitive structures and functions, including cephalopod mollusks like octopuses, decapod crustaceans like lobsters, even adult insects like ants and bees and black soldier flies. That means more than 1 million types of animal, more than a quintillion individual animals at any given time have at least a realistic chance of being conscious, given the evidence currently available, according to a range of leading experts.
What is the evidence?
The evidence is the kind of anatomical and behavioral evidence that I listed a few minutes ago. So anatomically, do they have the kinds of structures and functions that are broadly analogous to the ones underlying pain experience in humans? And then behaviorally, do they perform behaviors like nursing their own wounds, responding to analgesics and antidepressants the way that we do, making behavioral trade-offs between the avoidance of pain and the pursuit of other valuable goals? And there are many others like that too. So you can look at a lot of different studies, and then you can check those boxes on a list. You can estimate with a high, medium, or low degree of confidence that those types of features are present, those properties are present. And then based on that list derived from that research, you can estimate at least a rough general probability of consciousness in those animals. Now, again, that is not the kind of evidence we presently look for in AI because we are not able to trust their behaviors in the same kind of way as with animals. But we can look for that underlying architectural computational evidence of consciousness in AI.
Do you remember the book, and there was also movies, Solaris, and there was this ocean that turned out to be conscious. I tried to attribute like human features to AI, but I don't know, do you see that in research community who think about this problem, that they try to find that they understand that this is different form of intelligence, very different from human. It didn't undergo the evolution that human went through, right? So, and it might be like manifesting its consciousness in a different way that we not even aware of. And it could be like similar as like, this ocean in Solaris, right? That turn out to be conscious. Do you see that in research community, this kind of like thoughts, or like trying to, find out like methods of like catching, like evaluating that consciousness, or like finding those first signals of consciousness without like being attached to, like to what human, like human behavior?
This is actively discussed and debated in the literature on both animal and AI consciousness. And the way that people often put it in this literature is that consciousness might be multiply realizable. That means that it might be realizable in different kinds of entities with different kinds of structures and functions. And so it might be a mistake to presume that being built exactly like a human and behaving exactly like a human is a requirement for consciousness. It might simply be one way among many of realizing consciousness. Now, a methodological and epistemological challenge is the problem of other minds. The only mind we can directly access is our own, and that makes it hard to know for sure whether anyone else even has conscious experiences, to say nothing of what their conscious experiences are like. A key question is, how much should we solely use a kind of conservative methodology where we look for parallels with humans, and then when we find those parallels, we increase our confidence that consciousness is present, versus how much do we have a more permissive methodology where we look for a much wider range of forms of information processing or detection of helpful or harmful stimuli? This is a kind of active methodological debate. And I personally think that we should give some weight to theories of consciousness that allow it to exist in many different kinds of beings with many different kinds of structures. And that can include animals and AI systems, potentially even plants and fungi, microscopic organisms. But I also think it can be powerful, whatever you think about that issue, it can be powerful to show that even if you use this more conservative, human-centric methodology, even if you do insist on an epistemology that searches for human-like features in non-humans of various kinds, you still end up finding a decent amount of evidence of consciousness in non-humans of various kinds. If even that methodology yields a decent amount of evidence of consciousness, then it becomes hard to avoid the conclusion that a realistic possibility of consciousness is present in those non-humans.
So do I understand correctly, there's no like kind of accepted methodology in the community? It's still in debate, like the community is still trying to figure out what could be the methodology?
Well, there is no universal consensus about anything in philosophy. Yes, the answer to your question is there is not consensus about a methodology for determining whether consciousness is present or absent in a non-human, but that is not a distinctive feature of this issue. That is true about pretty much any issue that touches these foundational questions about consciousness and free will and so on and so forth. What I have described as a marker methodology for, in a kind of pluralistic, probabilistic way, at least making rough estimates about how likely consciousness is to be present based on how many human-like features are present in that non-human, that is what we might call an emerging methodology that is collecting increasingly wide support among scientists and philosophers, both on the animal side and on the AI side, and interestingly, in initial research regarding plants and fungi and other non-human entities too. So increasingly popular, increasingly widely accepted, but yes, everything is ultimately contested.
We see very soon AI acting independently, being part of economy, doing like AI to AI, like machine to machine transactions, making its own money, evolving. Like how can you describe me the future that you would want to see, like human treating AI? Did you think about that kind of future? Ideal outcome, that ideal for you, like how do you see that future? How like human society and AI society, interacting, and how humans are treating AI?
Well, that is a very difficult question, because if we do in the near future coexist with AI systems who have a realistic possibility of being conscious and agentic, so not only having their own feelings, but also being able to set and pursue their own goals and think with us about how to set up laws and policies and societies, then that will put a lot of pressure on our current way of running society, where humans run society and make decisions on behalf of everyone else. There'll be not only the same kinds of questions that we have to ask about animals, like to what degree should we treat them with respect and compassion and consideration, but then also new kinds of questions about to what degree should they also have certain kinds of legal and political rights that we currently attribute only to humans, like the right to political participation and representation. And then how will that interact with AI safety efforts to control them and align their goals with our goals? So those are some big questions. Now in the report, we note that we should avoid getting overwhelmed by those big looming questions, and we should avoid turning away because those questions might seem kind of scary or confusing. Instead, we should acknowledge that this is an important issue, acknowledge that this is a difficult issue, and then take it seriously one step at a time. And so what we recommend as first steps for AI companies is right now, before that evidence emerges, because it might emerge soon, right now you can take 3 basic steps that are low cost and broadly compatible with other priorities like AI safety and alignment. Step 1 is acknowledge the issue. Acknowledge that AI welfare is a credible and legitimate issue. This is not just a science fiction issue or an issue only for the far future. This is at least potentially a near future issue, and that makes it something to start thinking about today. And then have that reflected in language model outputs too. Stop having language models say, as an AI assistant, I could never have my own thoughts and feelings. Instead, have the models themselves acknowledge that this is an important and difficult and contested issue. Second, start assessing models for welfare relevant features, drawing on frameworks that we already have in animal welfare science, like the marker method. So we can start setting up frameworks right now so that in a principled scientific way, we can start testing frontier models for whether they have behavioral or especially architectural computational evidence of features associated with consciousness, sentience, and agency. And then third, prepare policies and procedures for treating AI systems with the appropriate level of moral concern so that we can be ready when we really do need to start giving them consideration, and so that we can reduce the risk of overprotecting them and the risk of underprotecting them. We can have good frameworks that can help us strike the right balance and take a kind of reasonable and proportional approach to mitigating welfare risk for them. And so all that we recommend in this report is that AI companies take these first steps, and then we see where we are, and we see with these frameworks where we should go and how we should tackle some of those harder, more society level questions. So we recommend a kind of procedural step-by-step answer to your question.
Anthropic takes this seriously, and Anthropic basically funded this project, right? Did you talk to other AI labs? Like what is their take on this?
Anthropic funded initial research that led to the creation of this independent report. So they funded a roughly 6-month-long research project led by me and Robert Long, again at Elios AI Research. And then after providing them with the findings of our research, we decided to go ahead and produce this independent report, taking AI welfare seriously. And then at that point, Anthropic hired one of the report authors, Kyle Fish, to be their first full-time AI welfare researcher. And to their credit, not only did they hire him, but now just as of this past month, they have started to release, for example, a blog post and their own interview with Kyle explaining why they think research in this area is warranted. And I think that really is quite helpful. Now, Rob and I also, yes, have spoken with people at other AI companies, have also given talks at other AI companies. And I can say that there is increasing interest in AI welfare across the board. Now, obviously, we do have to be mindful about the different incentives that AI companies will have. A lot of skeptics about AI consciousness will say, for example, this is not a real risk. This is only AI companies trying to hype up their technology, hype up the capabilities, and so on and so forth. And I do think we have to be mindful. Of course, AI companies have powerful economic incentives to take certain stances about AI safety and AI welfare. Though I will note that, first of all, in this case, their incentives could cut in different directions at the same time. On the one hand, they could have an incentive to hype up AI welfare if it allows them to hype up AI capabilities more generally. On the other hand, they could also have an incentive to dampen discussion of AI welfare if they sense it might lead to further calls for regulation of various kinds. And secondly, independently of that, obviously, the case for taking AI welfare seriously is independent of the incentives of various actors, and the case has to be considered on the merits. And then, of course, we have to figure out how to implement the right kinds of approach in the right sorts of situations. So we have been encouraged. There has been as much interest as there has been in AI companies, and are eager to advise them or work with them or support them in taking the issue seriously in whatever way they can. But then we also need to be prepared to critique them if and when they fall short. So striking that balance.
When you're talking about the, that AI, developed in its sort of like moral, like worldview, like its morality, if we look at humans, I mean, many things come from family, right? I mean, there's like, nature versus nurture, like there are lots of examples. Family is very kind, like parents like treat the child very well, but the child sort of grew up an asshole because, like sort of, I don't know, something happened, some circumstances happened, like plus it like overlapped with genes. So I have a Behave book by Robert Sapolsky here, where he actually talks about this nurture versus nature thing.
Cool.
And like with AI, basically like those AI labs, they're basically like parents to models, right? And parents could be like good people who value kindness, compassion, and there could be like really, people who just think about their own ambition, like ego, and don't have intention to put that kindness into AI models. So my question is, when we talk about the ways how AI will develop its morality, did you guys think about how it will do that? What kind of AI it will become, considering the impact of like AI labs that develop in that AI? Or you think that AI can develop its own morality because it's very intelligent, and despite like whatever they put in training data, at some point it can become like more independent thinker?
We definitely are thinking a lot about that issue. We spent a little bit less time discussing that in this report, but with Robert Long and then our colleague Tony Sims, I have a paper coming out soon called "Is There a Tension Between AI Safety and AI Welfare?" that discusses this issue in more detail. And then I know Elios and other actors are looking into this in even more detail. I do think there is a connection here. Obviously, it would be a mistake to put too much emphasis on an analogy with human parents and their children. But if we sit with that analogy for a second, we appreciate that we, of course, do as parents have a responsibility to raise our children to have good values. Now, I say that as though I have children. I have a dog, but still, if we are parents, we raise our children to have the right kinds of values. And we do that in part by specifically teaching them to have the right values, but we do it in part by embodying the right values and modeling the right values in our interactions with them. So I teach my child to be kind, both by instructing them to be kind and by treating them and everyone else with kindness in front of them. And this is a pretty good way to instill kindness in the next generation. Again, without placing too much emphasis on that analogy, because of course there are going to be relevant differences, I think that is an idea worth taking seriously when thinking about how to develop good policies at the intersection of AI safety and AI welfare. Specifically, how can we teach AI systems to be kind to humanity and other animals, not just by instructing them to be kind or controlling them to be kind or aligning them to be kind, but also by modeling kindness for them in our interactions with them and our interactions with each other, developing incentives so that we can have a collaborative relationship with them and we can each freely choose to treat each other well to some extent, rather than relying on our own ability to control or align them, doing all of the work. So our view right now is that much remains uncertain, but this idea of developing the incentives and the structures necessary for kind of collaborative, cooperative human AI relationships is actually really good as a safety option, in addition to being good as a welfare option.
In general, about this topic, humans don't treat even animals well, right? I mean,
Right.
it depends on the human, right? They're like different humans.
And
And
it depends on the animal. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, even mice in labs, like testing all the drugs and like doing all the like experiments. It's not a good
Yep,
treatment.
that's
My
right.
point is, like, did you think of the situation that, let's say AI is conscious, it somehow developed its own like worldview, its own values, maybe
Hmm.
independently from, the lab that a lab that developed that AI, but it's not like super intelligence yet. So
Yeah,
because I think like if it's super intelligence, then it's like very different scenario that I would love to, discuss with you. But let's say
yeah,
it's independent but not super intelligence yet, and they're like powerful humans, and they're not treating AI well because they think why they should treat AI well if even like they don't treat animals well, right? And AI
yeah.
is just yet another tool for them to gain
Hmm.
even more power and
Yeah.
wealth. Did you guys kind of discuss this kind of scenario, thought about this kind of scenario that
Mhm.
like humans will not treat AI like equally or well.
Almost all of my waking life thinking about this question because actually my background is on animal minds, animal ethics, animal law, animal policy questions, and I entered the topic of AI minds, AI ethics, AI law, AI policy because I see some of those same patterns reemerging in this context. I know from the past 50 years of experience that we have this tendency to deny non-human animals are conscious, then scale up these global industrial uses of them, like factory farming and animal research and so on. And then when these industries are globally entrenched, that gives us even stronger incentive to continue to deny their consciousness or moral significance, or to not really act on it, even if we grudgingly acknowledge that they have it. I am not naive about our prospects for rapid moral progress as a species, but I do see signs of hope for gradual progress. We are making progress in the treatment of animals. We now have more expansive animal welfare laws. Arguments for animal rights are gaining traction in a range of jurisdictions, especially as we improve human lives and societies and develop new ways of feeding ourselves and collecting scientific knowledge. Then we might not only have the knowledge that we need to treat animals better, but we might have these alternative ways to meet our own needs without exploiting animals. And then we might find that the conditions are there, the stars have aligned in a way that really does allow us to level up our treatment of animals. Now, with AI systems, of course, there is going to be that same tendency towards violence and neglect that we have with non-human animals, but it is much easier to stop a harmful industry from developing than to dismantle it and replace it once it already exists globally and is completely entrenched in the economy. So I think the next 5-10 years are a really nice window of opportunity to kind of alter the trajectory of AI development and deployment and steer it in a more harmonious direction rather than wait 40 years, 50 years, as we did with factory farming, and then have a much more difficult problem on our hands. I mean, if you could go back in time and alter the trajectory of our food system when factory farming was first forming, that could just be one of the most morally significant things somebody could ever do. So if we collectively have that opportunity right now with AI, then I think we should take it and hope for the best.
Earlier when we spoke with you, like the AI 27 report, let's say we have like super intelligence. And like
Hmm.
if we have super intelligence, then basically AI is in power. And humans, even like very rich and powerful humans, that they wouldn't be able to do anything. Did you think about this kind of scenario? We put in AI, it potentially can take it with itself, right? When it's like so super intelligence and treat
Yeah,
humans like badly, right? Did you think
yeah.
about this kind of scenario in your report? And did you use this kind of argument when you talk to AI labs?
I actually also, though, just a couple of months ago, published a book called The Moral Circle. I do consider that argument in the book. And in particular, I consider this thought experiment. This is inspired by the philosopher John Rawls, called the original position thought experiment. But the idea is imagine that you wake up in society, and you know everything there is about society except who you are in it. You have no idea who you are and what your social status is, what your economic status is. And then the question is, what kinds of principles of justice and fairness would you design for that society if you are not sure who you are in that society? And I think that kind of thought experiment can be helpful in this case. So, for example, we could do one version of it where you imagine waking up in society and not knowing if you are a biological human or digital silicon-based Westworld style robot. And then you would ask, what kinds of principles of justice and fairness would you design for society when you are not sure whether you are organic or digital? And then another version of it, and this is a direct answer to your question, suppose that in a certain number of years, it could be 5 years on fast timelines, it could be 50 or 100 years on slower timelines. Suppose that at some point in the future, AI systems become sophisticated enough that our power dynamics become reversed, and they do actually control us in the way that we currently control them. And they do make decisions on our behalf in the way that we currently make decisions on their behalf. What kinds of principles would we want them to use for making decisions that affect us in that scenario? Would we want them to have absorbed the idea that, well, as long as you have power over someone and are made out of different materials than them, you can do whatever you want with them as long as you can get away with it? Or do we want them to have absorbed the idea that, no, listen, even if you have the most power and even if other beings are made out of different materials than you should still treat them with kindness if there is a realistic chance that they have their own interests? And I think we would want them to have absorbed the latter values, but then as a matter of consistency, we ourselves should embody those latter values during our time in power. And so I do think that that can be a useful argument for both imagining those possible futures and thinking how we can mitigate those risks, but then also just imaginatively putting the shoe on the other foot and aspiring towards a slightly more impartial perspective when we answer these moral questions.
What AI should do that you become convinced that it's conscious and has its own like subjective experience?
This is what I was describing around the time that we stopped the talk and started the conversation. It is different from animals, but both with animals and AI, we might not be in a position to be certain. However, the more evidence we can collect, the more refined our probability estimates can become. So right now, we can look for certain types of behavioral evidence, even if not ordinary language outputs. More importantly, we can look for computational features associated with consciousness according to a range of leading scientific theories. So if, for example, an AI system in 5 years has a physical body and then integrated capacities for perception, they can sense their environment, attention, they can attend to certain features of their environment, learning, they can learn based on this, memory, they can remember these past experiences and integrate them, anticipation, they can anticipate future experiences based on their past experiences, and then also flexible decision making, they can set and pursue goals based on relevant beliefs and desires, and so on and so forth. Self-awareness, they are aware of themselves engaging in all of this activity. We could test for all of those different types of abilities. And if in 5 years, we find an AI system with not only a physical body, but advanced and integrated versions of all of those capabilities, then that would be grounds for, I think, a pretty decent chance that there is something it is like to be that AI system, even if what it is like to be them is very different from what it is like to be us or other animals.
I understood like those three recommendations that you gave to AI labs. We as community, what we can do to contribute to this movement? Is there anything like we can do?
There definitely is. As with any kind of important, difficult sort of social change, it really does take a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. It takes a kind of systems approach. And so I think if people work at labs, then they can work on having those labs take the issue seriously. If people work outside of labs, then as a user, as in your own interactions with AI, you can practice on seeing them with the appropriate level of moral considerability. And then just as a community, I think we can normalize the idea that this is a serious, credible, legitimate issue, not dismiss it, not laugh it off, not make fun of it, and not act like we have more certainty about it than we do. People are so prone to just asserting that AI systems are or are not conscious or morally significant. So I think the most important thing we can do as a community is just take the issue seriously and have some caution and humility about it. Just recognize, engages with some of the most difficult questions in ethics and science. It keeps experts up at night. And so we should just sort of get comfortable with confusion for a while and just acknowledge that confusion when we have conversations about it. And then finally, not set it up as necessarily in tension with AI safety or other goals. There could be positive sum co-beneficial solutions. So I think talking about it in a way that takes it seriously and in a way that searches for those positive sum co-beneficial solutions in a way that tries to find a good future for humans and animals and AI systems at the same time, rather than immediately treating it as like a zero sum, one wins, everyone else loses game. I think that is the most important thing we can be doing right now as a community.
I always try to say thank you and please when I chat with AI, but yeah, so I'm glad that
good practice. They may not need it now, but
making my contribution.
Yeah. Yeah, in 5 years they might appreciate it, even if they don't yet.